Imagine opening a history book from 200 years ago and finding an entire empire covering millions of square miles that you've never heard of. An empire so vast it stretched from the edges of Europe all the way to the Pacific Ocean. An empire that appeared on hundreds of maps for centuries, drawn by the most respected mapmakers of their time. And then, suddenly, it vanished. Not gradually, not through conquest or collapse like Rome. It simply disappeared from our maps, our textbooks, and our collective memory. This is the mystery of Tartaria, and depending on who you ask, it's either one of the greatest historical oversights ever made or one of the most fascinating conspiracy theories of the modern internet age. Before we dive deep into this rabbit hole, I need to tell you something important. This isn't just another story about a forgotten kingdom. This is a story about how we understand history itself, about how maps work, how names change, and how sometimes the things that seem most mysterious have surprisingly simple explanations. But along the way, we'll explore grand palaces, impossible architecture, alleged cover-ups, and a theory involving a worldwide flood of mud that supposedly buried an advanced civilization. So, get comfortable, because we're about to explore every corner of the Tartaria mystery, from the real historical records to the wildest internet theories. And by the end, you'll understand why this topic has captured so many people's imaginations.
Let's start with the maps themselves. If you search through old libraries and archives, you'll find something strange. From the 1500s all the way through the 1800s, European maps consistently show a massive region labeled Tartary or Tartary. Abraham Ortelius, one of the most famous map makers of the Renaissance, published a map in 1570 showing Tartaria covering an enormous portion of Asia. This wasn't some obscure map that nobody saw. Ortelius created what's considered the first modern atlas, and his maps were used by scholars, traders, and explorers across Europe. As decades passed, other famous cartographers continued to include Tartaria on their maps. Jodocus Hondius published maps showing Tartaria in the early 1600s. Guillaume de la Lys, who became the first official geographer to the King of France, created detailed maps of Great Tartary in the 1700s. These weren't fantasy maps like medieval cartographers drew, with sea monsters and the edge of the world. These were serious attempts by educated men to document the known world. But here's where things get interesting. The borders of Tartary seemed to change depending on which map you looked at and when it was made. Some maps showed Western Tartary and Eastern Tartary. Others divided the region into Chinese Tartary, Russian Tartary, Independent Tartary, and even Little Tartary down near the Black Sea. It was like the map makers themselves weren't quite sure what Tartaria actually was. By the mid-1800s, something changed. Gradually, the word Tartaria started disappearing from maps. It was replaced by names like Siberia, Mongolia, Manchuria, and Central Asia. By the early 1900s, Tartaria was completely gone. You could search through modern atlases and history books, and it was as if the place had never existed. This is where the mystery begins for many people. How does an empire covering millions of square miles just vanish from history? Where did all the people go? What happened to their buildings, their culture, their records? And most importantly, why don't we learn about this in school? For some researchers and internet sleuths, the disappearance of Tartaria from our maps represents something sinister. They believe there was a deliberate effort to erase this empire from history. They point to ornate buildings around the world, from the United States Capitol to elaborate structures built for world's fairs, and claim these weren't actually built when historians say they were. Instead, these theorists argue these buildings are remnants of the Tartarian Empire, repurposed and falsely dated to hide the truth about an advanced civilization that once ruled much of the world. The theory has grown remarkably detailed. Some believers claim Tartaria had technology far beyond what we're told was possible in the past. Free wireless energy, advanced transportation systems, architectural techniques we can't replicate today. They suggest this empire achieved world peace and prosperity, which made it a threat to certain powerful groups who wanted to control the world. So these groups destroyed Tartaria through a combination of warfare, natural disasters they might have caused, and a systematic rewriting of history.
The most dramatic claim involves something called the mudflood. According to this theory, a massive deluge of mud swept across the world in the 1800s, burying the lower levels of Tartarian buildings. Believers point to old photographs and modern structures that have doors and windows below ground level as proof. They argue these aren't basements that were deliberately built underground. They're the ground floors of buildings that got buried when mud covered the world. But here's the thing about mysteries. Sometimes the truth is actually stranger and more interesting than the conspiracy. And sometimes what looks like a massive cover-up is actually just the result of how history works, how geography was understood in different eras, and how words change meaning over time. The real story of Tartaria involves Mongol invasions, European ignorance about Asia, Russian imperial expansion, changing terminology, and the fascinating way that a single word can mean completely different things to different people in different centuries. It involves real empires, real battles, and real people whose stories have been thoroughly documented, just not in the way the conspiracy theories suggest. Throughout this journey, we're going to look at both sides. We'll explore what the conspiracy theorists claim and show you the exact buildings and maps they reference. But we'll also dig into what historians, archaeologists, and geographers actually know about this region. We'll trace the word Tartaria back to its origins, follow it through centuries of changing meaning, and watch as it gradually transformed from a vague term for an unknown region into several specific geographic labels before finally disappearing entirely. We'll examine why Europeans used this term in the first place. We'll learn about the real empires that existed in these regions, including the Mongol Empire, various Tartar khanates, and the expansion of the Russian Empire. We'll look at incredible architecture that really was built during the time periods historians claim, and understand why some buildings have features below ground level. By the end, you'll understand why this mystery exists. You'll see how gaps in historical knowledge, combined with the internet's ability to spread alternative theories, created one of the most elaborate historical conspiracy theories of recent years. You'll also learn about real historical events that are actually more fascinating than any fictional empire could be. But most importantly, you'll be able to look at old maps, understand what they actually show, and separate historical fact from modern myth.
because the story of how we came to understand and name our world is itself an incredible tale of exploration, cultural exchange, misunderstanding, and gradual discovery. So let's begin our journey into the mystery of Tartaria. Let's find out what this word really meant, why it appeared on so many maps, and what actually happened to the people and places it described. The truth, as you're about to discover, is far more interesting than simple explanations would suggest. To understand the Tartarian mystery, we need to become map detectives. We need to look at dozens of old maps, read what the cartographers wrote on them, and piece together what Europeans actually knew about Asia during different time periods. This investigation will reveal something fascinating. The word Tartaria never meant just one thing, and the confusion started the very first time it appeared on European maps. Let's start in 1570 with Abraham Ortelius. His atlas, called Theatrum Orbis Terrarum, was groundbreaking. It was the first time someone had gathered the best maps of every known region into a single book. This wasn't just a collection of random maps. Ortelius carefully studied the best available sources, compared different reports, and tried to create the most accurate picture of the world that was possible at the time. His map of Tartaria is beautiful and elaborate. It shows a massive region extending from the Volga River in the west all the way to the Pacific Ocean in the east. The title calls it Tartaria Sive Magni Kami Imperium, which translates to Tartary, or the Empire of the Great Khan. Right there in the title, we get our first important clue. Ortelius wasn't describing a country called Tartaria. He was trying to show the lands that had once been controlled by the Mongol Khans. The map includes decorative elements that were common in this era. There are drawings of people in different clothing styles, showing how Europeans imagined the people of this region dressed. There are tents representing nomadic peoples. There are mountains and rivers, though their positions aren't always accurate because European explorers hadn't actually mapped most of this region in detail yet. Here's something crucial to understand about these early maps. When Ortelius and other cartographers labeled a region Tartaria, they weren't saying there was a unified nation-state with that name. Nation-states, in the modern sense, didn't really exist yet. Instead, they were using Tartaria as a general term for a vast area that Europeans didn't know much about. It was similar to how medieval maps might label parts of Africa as Ethiopia, even though that word referred to many different kingdoms and peoples. Moving forward to 1606, we find Jodocus Hondius creating his own map of Tartary. Hondius was continuing the work of Gerard Mercator, another legendary cartographer. Hondius wrote on his map that he had carefully studied accounts from English and Dutch travelers. This tells us something important. By this time, more Europeans were traveling through parts of Asia and bringing back reports. The maps were gradually becoming more accurate, even if they still had major gaps. But look at how Hondius divided up his map. He shows different regions within Tartary, each apparently controlled by different groups. This wasn't one empire. It was a patchwork of various kingdoms, khanates, nomadic tribes, and territories that Europeans lumped together under one convenient term because they didn't have detailed information about them. By 1757, we can see how European understanding was evolving. A French map from this year, titled Carte de Tartarie, or Map of Tartary, shows even more divisions. There's independent Tartary, Chinese Tartary, Western Tartary, Eastern Tartary, and Muscovite Tartary, covering the northern regions. Down near Ukraine, there's Little Tartary. Each of these labels referred to different political situations. Chinese Tartary indicated regions where China had influence or control, including Manchuria and parts of Mongolia. Muscovite Tartary meant lands under Russian control in Siberia.
Independent Tartary referred to Central Asian regions that weren't firmly controlled by any major empire. These labels were attempts by European mapmakers to keep track of which major power had influence over which regions. Guillaume de Lille, the French royal geographer, created particularly detailed maps of Great Tartary in the early 1700s. De Lille was known for his rigorous standards. He didn't just copy other people's maps. He carefully studied travel accounts, compared different sources, and tried to only include information he could verify. His maps show Siberia, parts of Central Asia,
regions north of the Arctic Circle, and various other territories. He notes on his maps which information comes from which travelers and explorers. This is important because it shows these cartographers weren't making things up or copying ancient mythology. They were trying their best to map a region that was genuinely difficult for Europeans to access and understand. Let's jump ahead to the late 1700s and early 1800s. By this time, European geographic knowledge was improving dramatically. Russian explorers were mapping Siberia in great detail. The Russian Empire was expanding eastward and southward, bringing these regions under direct control. European powers were competing for influence in Central Asia, and crucially, the terminology was starting to change. Maps from the 1790s start using Siberia more prominently for the northern Asian regions controlled by Russia. They use specific names like Tobolsk, Yakutsk, and Orenburg for Russian provinces. Mongolia starts appearing as its own label. Manchuria becomes more clearly defined. Central Asia is being divided into specific khanates and tribal territories with their own names. An 1824 map shows something fascinating. You can see both Chinese Tartary and China existing side by side. This makes sense when you understand what Chinese Tartary meant. It wasn't a separate country from China. It was the northern regions that the Chinese Qing dynasty controlled, including Manchuria, where the Qing dynasty actually originated. The Qing were Manchu people who had conquered China in the 1600s, so these northern territories were integral to their empire. By 1850, the changes are dramatic. Mongolia now appears clearly on maps. China has expanded labels. And most tellingly, Tartary is starting to disappear. The word independent Tartary might still appear in Central Asia, but it's being replaced by more specific terms. We start seeing the names of actual khanates like Khiva, Bukhara, and Kokand. These were real political entities with their own rulers, laws, and territories. Why did this change happen? Several reasons. First, European geographic knowledge improved massively. As more explorers, traders, diplomats, and eventually colonizers traveled through these regions, they learned the actual names that local people used for their lands. They discovered the real political divisions. They realized that lumping everything together as Tartary was inaccurate and unhelpful. Second, the Russian Empire was systematically conquering and administering these territories. As they brought regions under direct control, they renamed them using Russian administrative terms. Siberia became divided into specific provinces with Russian names. Central Asian khanates were conquered one by one, and their territories were incorporated into the Russian Empire with new administrative labels.
The word Tartary also started to seem old-fashioned and imprecise. It carried medieval connotations. As geography became more scientific, cartographers wanted to use accurate local names rather than vague Latin terms. This was part of a broader trend in 19th century mapmaking toward precision and standardization. By the early 1900s, Tartary had completely disappeared from serious maps. It was replaced by a patchwork of specific terms. Siberia for Russian-controlled northern Asia, Mongolia for the Mongolian regions, Manchuria for northeastern China, Central Asia for the region between the Caspian Sea and China, and more specific country and province names throughout. But here's the thing that conspiracy theorists point to. All these maps exist. You can go to libraries and see them. You can find maps from 1570, 1650, 1750, and 1850 and watch Tartaria appear, spread, evolve, and then disappear. If you don't understand the context, if you don't know about European geographical ignorance, changing terminology, and imperial expansion, this looks mysterious. It looks like an empire that was deliberately erased. However, when you read what the cartographers actually wrote on their maps, when you study the travel accounts they cited, when you trace how geographic knowledge evolved over 3 centuries, a different story emerges. This wasn't one empire disappearing. This was Europeans gradually learning the actual names and political divisions of a region they had previously known very little about. The maps themselves provide evidence for this interpretation. Early maps show Tartaria with vague boundaries and little internal detail. Later maps show more and more internal divisions, more accurate river and mountain placements, more specific labels. The progression isn't a unified empire fragmenting, it's a fog of ignorance gradually lifting. Think of it this way. Imagine if aliens were trying to map Earth from far away with limited information. They might label a huge region Land of English Speakers, covering North America, Britain, Australia, and New Zealand. Over time, as they learned more, they'd realize this wasn't one country, but many different nations that happened to share a language. The label Land of English Speakers would disappear from their maps, replaced by United States, Canada, United Kingdom, Australia, and so on. The land didn't vanish. The aliens just learned to be more specific. That's essentially what happened with Tartaria. As European knowledge improved, a vague catch-all term was replaced by specific, accurate names for the actual places and peoples of Northern and Central Asia.
Now we need to talk about the most important question. Who were the Tartars? Were they real people, or just a label Europeans invented? The answer is both more complex and more interesting than either extreme. There really were people called Tartars, but the word meant different things at different times, and Europeans often used it incorrectly or as a catch-all term for anyone from the Asian steppes. Let's start with the earliest recorded use of the term. The word Tartar first appears in ancient texts referring to nomadic tribes living in northeastern Mongolia and around Lake Baikal, starting around the 5th century. These early Tartars spoke Turkic languages, not Mongolic languages. They were part of the complex web of nomadic peoples who roamed the Eurasian steppes, raising horses and sheep, fighting over grazing lands, and occasionally raiding settled civilizations. The name itself appears on the Orphan inscriptions, ancient Turkic monuments carved in the 8th century. These stones mention the 9 Tartars and 30 Tartars, referring to tribal confederations. So the name definitely existed, and it referred to real groups of people. However, these early Tartars were just one of many tribal groupings in Central Asia. They weren't particularly powerful or united. Everything changed in the early 1200s with the rise of Genghis Khan. Here's where the history gets really interesting and a bit confusing. Genghis Khan was actually Mongol, not Tartar. In fact, according to The Secret History of the Mongols, an ancient Mongolian text, the Tartars were enemies of Genghis Khan's tribe. The Tartars had betrayed an earlier Mongol Khan to the Jurchen Jin dynasty, and they had poisoned Genghis Khan's father, Yesuhei. In 1202, Genghis Khan took revenge. He allied with another tribal leader, Ong Khan, and attacked the Tartars. The battle was brutal. Genghis Khan ordered all Tartar men taller than the height of a cart's linchpin to be executed. This meant killing all the adult males. Only women and children were spared, and they were absorbed into Genghis Khan's empire. Genghis Khan was systematically destroying the Tartars as a distinct group. So, if Genghis Khan destroyed the Tartars, why did Europeans call his empire Tartary and his people Tartars? This is where things get confusing, and historians have debated it for years. Several theories exist. One theory suggests that Tartar survivors and captured Tartars were forced to fight in the vanguard of Mongol armies. When these armies invaded Russia and Eastern Europe in the 1230s and 1240s, the Tartars were often the first troops Europeans encountered. So Europeans naturally called the entire invasion the Tartar invasion, even though it was led by Mongol Khans. Another theory points out that many Turkic-speaking peoples called themselves or were called Tartars, even if they weren't from the original Tartar tribes. When these Turkic peoples joined the Mongol Empire, they brought the name with them. The Mongol armies were actually very diverse, including Mongols, various Turkic tribes, Chinese soldiers, Persian engineers, and others. The Turkic component was large enough that Tartar became a common label for the entire group.
A third theory, suggested by historian Stephen Powell, argues that during the early decades of the Mongol Empire, even ethnic Mongols sometimes referred to themselves as Tatars. This might have been the dominant endonym, the name people called themselves, before Mongol became standardized as the imperial identity. If true, it would mean that early European accounts correctly recorded what the invaders called themselves, even though later historians would prefer to call them Mongols. There's also a darker linguistic twist. When Europeans heard about these invaders from the east, they added an extra R to create Tartar instead of Tatar. This change was deliberate. It linked the invaders to Tartarus, which in Greek mythology was the deepest pit of the underworld, a place of suffering and punishment. Calling them Tartars instead of Tatars implied they came from hell itself. It was propaganda designed to make them seem more frightening and evil. Regardless of these naming controversies, the Mongol Empire had a massive impact on the regions Europeans would label Tartary. Starting with Genghis Khan's unification of the Mongol tribes in 1206, the empire expanded at an incredible rate. By the time of Genghis Khan's death in 1227, the empire stretched from Korea to the Caspian Sea. His descendants continued expanding, conquering Russia, parts of Eastern Europe, Central Asia, Persia, and China. But here's the crucial point. The Mongol Empire didn't stay unified. After the death of Genghis Khan's grandson, Kublai Khan, in 1294, it had already fractured into 4 major khanates, each effectively independent. These were the Golden Horde in Russia and Eastern Europe, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, and the Yuan dynasty in China. The Golden Horde is particularly important for understanding European use of the word Tartary. Founded by Batu Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson, it controlled the steppes north of the Black and Caspian Seas, including much of Russia. The Rus princes had to travel to the Golden Horde's capital at Sarai to pay tribute and receive permission to rule their principalities. This system lasted for about 250 years, from the 1240s until the late 1400s. The people of the Golden Horde were a mix of Mongols and Turkic peoples, especially Kipchaks. Over time, the Turkic element became dominant. The Khans converted to Islam. The language shifted from Mongolian to various Turkic dialects. And crucially for our story, these people were called Tartars by the Russians and Europeans. When the Golden Horde eventually fractured, it broke into several smaller khanates: the Crimean Khanate, the Kazan Khanate, the Astrakhan Khanate, and others. These khanates were very real political entities with their own rulers, armies, laws, and cultures. The Crimean Khanate, for example, lasted from 1441 until 1783, when it was finally conquered by the Russian Empire. The people there were called Crimean Tatars, and their descendants still exist today, with distinct culture and language. Similarly, the Kazan Khanate controlled the Volga River region until it was conquered by Ivan the Terrible in 1552. The Volga Tatars, descendants of people from this Khanate, still live in the Russian Republic of Tatarstan. These weren't fantasy kingdoms that were erased from history. They're thoroughly documented. We have their coins, their buildings, their written records, accounts from travelers who visited them, and detailed chronicles of their conquests and eventual defeats. The architecture of Kazan, the former capital of the Kazan Khanate, still stands. You can visit it today. There's no mystery about whether these places existed.
But here's where European confusion comes in. To someone living in France or England in the 1500s or 1600s, all of these various khanates, nomadic tribes, and Turkic peoples were lumped together as Tartars living in Tartaria. The European understanding was simplistic because detailed information was hard to come by. It's like how Americans today might use Middle Eastern as a catch-all term for dozens of different ethnic groups, languages, and countries. It's not that the term is completely wrong, but it erases important distinctions. The actual Tartar peoples had rich cultures, though they varied significantly depending on where they lived. The Crimean Tartars developed a settled agricultural society mixed with pastoral nomadism. They traded extensively with the Ottoman Empire and other Mediterranean powers. Their khans built impressive palaces. They had a written literary tradition using Arabic script to write their Turkic language. The Volga Tartars also developed a mixed economy of farming and herding. They became known as skilled craftsmen working with wood, ceramics, leather, cloth, and metal. They were important traders, connecting European Russia with Central Asia and beyond. Their cities had mosques, madrasas for education, and bustling markets. The Siberian Tartars, living in western Siberia, maintained more of the nomadic lifestyle, but also had permanent settlements. They adapted to the harsh Siberian environment, developing specialized survival skills. When the Russian Empire expanded into Siberia, many Siberian Tartars were gradually absorbed into Russian society, though some maintained their distinct identity. Central Asian Tartars lived in a region of ancient cities and Silk Road trade routes. Places like Bukhara, Samarkand, and Khiva had been centers of learning and commerce for over 1,000 years. The people here were highly educated, with traditions of mathematics, astronomy, poetry, and architecture. Though Europeans often called this entire region Tartary, it included Uzbeks, Tajiks, Turkmen, Kazakhs, and many other distinct ethnic groups,
each with their own language and culture. One crucial thing to understand is that none of these peoples called their land Tartaria. That was a European label. The Crimean Tartars called their kingdom the Crimean Khanate. The people of Kazan called their land the Kazan Khanate. Central Asian peoples named their lands after their cities or tribes, the Khanate of Bukhara, the Kazakh steppe, and so on. Tartary, or Tartaria, wasn't how they identified themselves. This is similar to how Native Americans didn't call themselves Indians until Europeans mistakenly applied that label and it stuck. The indigenous peoples of North America had their own names for themselves and their lands. Similarly, the various Tartar and Turkic peoples of Northern and Central Asia had their own identities that Europeans only gradually learned about. By the 1800s, Russian imperial expansion was bringing all these regions under direct control. The Russian Empire conquered the remaining independent khanates one by one. They renamed territories using Russian administrative terms. They conducted censuses, classified people into ethnic categories, and attempted to impose Russian culture and Christianity. This process was often brutal and colonial.
Modern Tatars still exist in significant numbers. The 2010 Russian census recorded about 5 million Tatars, making them one of the largest ethnic minorities in Russia. Most live in the Volga region, in the Republic of Tatarstan, which has a degree of autonomy within the Russian Federation. Crimean Tatars, who suffered mass deportation by Stalin in 1944, have been returning to Crimea since the 1990s. There are also Tatar communities in Central Asia, especially in Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. So, to answer our original question, yes, Tatars were and are real people with real history and culture. But they were never a single unified empire called Tartaria. They were various groups speaking related Turkic languages, living across a vast region, sometimes united under powerful khanates, sometimes divided into competing tribes, gradually conquered by expanding empires, but never disappearing or being erased from history. Their story is thoroughly documented, and their descendants live among us today. One of the most visually compelling parts of the Tartaria conspiracy theory involves architecture. Scroll through online forums or social media groups dedicated to this topic, and you'll find hundreds of photographs of beautiful, ornate buildings. Conspiracy theorists claim these structures are evidence of an advanced Tartarian civilization, with technology far beyond what was supposedly possible when historians say they were built. Let's examine these claims carefully, look at specific buildings that are cited as evidence, and understand what architectural historians actually know about them. The theory often begins with World's Fair buildings. Between the 1850s and 1930s, major cities around the world hosted international expositions showcasing industrial, technological, and cultural achievements. These fairs featured elaborate temporary architecture designed to impress millions of visitors. The buildings were often constructed from inexpensive materials like staff, which is a mixture of plaster and fiber, built over wooden frames. The 1893 World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago is a favorite target of Tartaria theorists. The fair featured a white city of massive neoclassical buildings covering over 600 acres. These structures looked like permanent stone palaces with columns, domes, statues, and intricate decorative details. Photos from the time show buildings that seem impossibly grand and complex. The theory goes like this. These buildings couldn't have been constructed in the short time available. They look too sophisticated. They must have been discovered, not built. Therefore, they were remnants of the Tartarian Empire that organizers simply cleaned up and claimed as their own. When the fair ended and most buildings were demolished, it wasn't because they were temporary structures, it was to destroy evidence of the advanced Tartarian civilization. This theory falls apart when you examine the actual historical record. We have detailed documentation of these fairs. We have architectural plans showing exactly how the buildings were designed. We have construction photographs showing them being built frame by frame. We have contracts with construction companies, payroll records for thousands of workers, invoices for materials, and contemporary newspaper articles describing the construction process step by step. Take the Chicago World's Fair's central building, the Administration Building. It was designed by architect Richard Morris Hunt. His architectural firm's records still exist. They show the design process, the materials chosen, the construction timeline, and even how much it cost. The building's dome was covered in staff, not stone. The whole structure was meant to last just a few months, then be torn down. And that's exactly what happened. It was demolished in 1894 after the fair closed. But why did they build such elaborate structures if they were only temporary? This is actually a fascinating part of World's Fair history. These events were massive competitions between nations. Each country wanted to demonstrate its sophistication, industrial capability, and cultural refinement. The host city needed to create an unforgettable experience. Architects were given huge budgets to create spectacular designs that would amaze visitors and generate publicity. The use of staff as a building material was perfect for this purpose. It could be molded into complex shapes mimicking stone carving, but it was much lighter and faster to install. Skilled plasterers could create ornate details that would take stonemasons months to carve. The buildings looked permanent, but were actually theatrical sets built to impress for a single season. The 1915 Panama Pacific International Exposition in San Francisco provides another example. The fair featured the Tower of Jewels, a magnificent 400-foot tower covered in colored glass jewels that sparkled in the sun. Tartaria theorists claimed this couldn't have been built in the available time and must have been a remnant of an ancient civilization. But again, we have complete documentation. The tower was designed by architects Thomas Hastings and Carrere and Hastings. Construction photos show it being built from steel framework covered with staff. The glass jewels were called Nova Gems, manufactured specifically for the fair by a company that still has records of the order. After the exposition closed, the tower was demolished as planned. Some of the Nova Gems were kept as souvenirs and still exist in museums and private collections.
The theory extends beyond World's Fair buildings to government structures, train stations, opera houses, and other grand buildings from the late 1800s and early 1900s. Theorists point to buildings like the United States Capitol and claim they're too sophisticated to have been built when historians say they were. Let's examine the U.S. Capitol specifically. Construction began in 1793. The building has been expanded and modified many times. We have detailed records of every construction phase. We know the names of the architects. William Thornton designed the original building. Benjamin Latrobe added the House and Senate wings. Thomas U. Walter designed the current dome, completed in 1863. We have their architectural drawings. We have construction photographs from the 1850s showing the dome being built piece by piece. Most importantly, we can trace the evolution of the building over 2 centuries. Early paintings and photographs show what it looked like at different stages. It didn't spring into existence fully formed. It grew gradually as the nation grew, with each generation adding to it. There's no mystery here, just well-documented construction history. The theory also focuses on buildings with windows and doors below modern ground level. Tartaria theorists claim this proves the mudflood, that these buildings weren't designed with basements, but were partially buried when mud covered the world. They share photographs of old buildings where you can see windows at sidewalk level or even below, accessible only by stairs leading down. This sounds compelling until you learn about urban development history. Cities have been raising street levels for practical reasons for centuries. When streets weren't paved, they would gradually accumulate dirt, refuse, and debris, effectively raising the surface over decades. When cities modernized in the 1800s and early 1900s, they often deliberately raised street levels to install sewers, improve drainage, and create more level terrain. Seattle provides a perfect example. After a fire destroyed much of downtown Seattle in 1889, the city decided to raise the street level by up to 35 feet in some areas. This was done to solve flooding problems and install modern sewers. The old ground floors of buildings became basements, and new entrances were built at the raised street level. You can tour underground Seattle today and see the old storefronts that are now below ground. This wasn't a mystery, it was deliberate urban planning, and the entire process was documented in newspapers, city records, and photographs. Similar processes happened in Chicago, San Francisco, Boston, and cities around the world. Sometimes streets were raised. Sometimes the area around buildings was excavated and lowered to create basement levels that provided valuable extra space. Sometimes both happened at different times in a building's history. None of this requires a mysterious worldwide mudflood. What about the claim that Tartarian buildings had advanced technology like free wireless energy? This theory focuses on architectural elements like domes, spires, and ornamental metalwork on rooftops. Theorists claim these weren't decorative, but were actually antennas harvesting atmospheric energy or receiving wireless power transmissions. Let's examine this carefully. Many grand buildings from the late 1800s and early 1900s do have elaborate spires, metal ornaments, and sometimes actual lightning rods. But we know exactly why these features exist, and it has nothing to do with energy harvesting. Domes and spires served multiple purposes. Architecturally, they created impressive silhouettes that made buildings landmarks. They demonstrated engineering skill and artistic vision. Many were topped with symbols reflecting the building's purpose. Government buildings might have eagles, churches had crosses, universities had academic symbols. These weren't antennas, but statements about identity and purpose. Lightning rods were indeed used on tall buildings, but not for power generation. Benjamin Franklin invented the lightning rod in the 1750s to protect buildings from lightning strikes. The rod provides a path for lightning's electrical charge to safely reach the ground, rather than damaging the building. By the late 1800s, lightning rods were standard safety equipment on tall structures. They prevented fires and structural damage, nothing more. Some theorists point to ornate metalwork and claim it shows evidence of a lost electrical grid. But decorative metalwork was extremely popular in the Victorian era and Beaux Arts architectural style precisely because new industrial processes made it affordable. Factories could mass-produce ornate cast iron, bronze, and copper elements. What once required expensive handcrafting by skilled metalworkers could now be manufactured cheaply. Architects enthusiastically incorporated these elements into their designs to create visual richness.
The actual electrical systems in these buildings are well documented. When electricity was introduced to buildings starting in the 1880s, it required extensive wiring installations that architects and engineers carefully planned. We have the plans, the specifications, and the bills from electrical contractors. Early electrical systems were dangerous, prone to fires, and required constant maintenance. They weren't wireless or particularly advanced. They were crude by modern standards, using exposed wires, simple switches, and inefficient incandescent bulbs. What about claims that the construction techniques used in these buildings are impossible to replicate today? This theory suggests that we've somehow lost the knowledge and technology to build such structures, but this doesn't hold up to scrutiny. Modern architects and engineers can absolutely build structures like 19th century train stations or government buildings. In fact, we can build them better, faster, and safer using modern materials and techniques. What we often don't do is build in those architectural styles because tastes have changed and because those building methods are expensive. Consider stone carving. Victorian-era buildings often featured elaborate stone carvings of faces, animals, plants, and abstract designs. Today, we have skilled stone carvers who do restoration work on historic buildings, proving the techniques haven't been lost. What's changed is that labor costs have increased dramatically. Paying skilled carvers to spend weeks creating decorative elements is expensive. Modern buildings typically use simpler designs because they're more cost-effective, not because we can't do complex work. The same applies to plasterwork, wood carving, ironwork, and other decorative crafts. These skills still exist. They're taught in specialized schools and used in historic preservation. You can hire craftspeople today who can replicate Victorian-era architectural details with stunning accuracy. The knowledge hasn't been lost, the economic incentive to use it on every building has changed. There's also a tendency to idealize old construction while ignoring its problems. Yes, old buildings often used thick walls, solid materials, and careful craftsmanship. But they also had terrible insulation, poor heating and cooling, inadequate lighting, no elevators, primitive plumbing, and were often death traps in fires. Modern building codes exist because of the countless disasters that occurred in older buildings. The Star Fort theory represents another architectural angle of the Tartaria conspiracy. Star forts are military fortifications with a distinctive star-shaped design, featuring angular bastions that allowed defenders to cover all approaches with crossfire. These forts were built around the world from the 1500s through the 1800s. Theorists claim these forts are too similar across different continents to have been designed independently. They must be remnants of a global Tartarian civilization. Some even claim the fort's geometric shapes served purposes related to energy generation or some other advanced technology.
In reality, star forts represent a well-documented evolution in military architecture. When cannons became powerful enough to demolish medieval castle walls, military engineers had to adapt. Italian engineers in the early 1500s developed the star fort design, called Tres Italienne. The angular bastions eliminated blind spots where attackers could approach protected from defensive fire. The lower profile and angled walls deflected cannonballs better than vertical castle walls. This design was so effective that it spread rapidly. Military engineers studied at the same schools, read the same treatises on fortification design, and shared knowledge across Europe. When European powers established colonies worldwide, they brought this fort design with them. That's why you find similar star forts in Europe, the Americas, Africa, and Asia. It wasn't a lost civilization. It was successful military technology spreading through normal channels of knowledge transmission. We have extensive written records about star fort design. Engineers like Vauban in France published detailed treatises explaining the mathematics and principles behind their designs. Architectural plans for specific forts survive in archives. Construction records show who built them, how long it took, and how much it cost. There's no mystery here. The Tartaria architectural theory also sometimes includes the claim that many old buildings show evidence of sophisticated acoustic engineering, particularly in theaters and concert halls. Some theorists suggest this proves advanced sound technology that we've since lost. It's true that some old performance spaces have remarkable acoustics. The ancient Greek theater at Epidaurus has such good natural sound amplification that a whisper on stage can be heard in the back row. Some 19th century concert halls are acoustically superior to many modern venues. But this isn't mysterious. Ancient builders understood acoustics through experimentation and accumulated knowledge passed down through generations. They didn't need electronic measurement equipment. They could listen to how sound behaved in spaces and adjust designs accordingly. Semicircular theater designs naturally amplify sound toward the audience. Hard reflecting surfaces project sound, while soft surfaces absorb it. These are physical principles that builders learned through experience. Some old concert halls sound better than modern ones because they were built specifically for acoustic quality, often at enormous expense, while many modern venues must balance acoustics with other requirements like cost, sightlines, air conditioning systems, and flexible staging. Also, survivorship bias plays a role. We remember the great old concert halls and forget the dozens of poorly designed ones that were demolished or renovated. The architectural evidence, when examined carefully, consistently supports conventional history. We have documentation for these buildings' design and construction. We understand the techniques and materials used. We can trace the evolution of architectural styles through time. The buildings that conspiracy theorists claim are mysterious are actually some of the best documented structures in history, precisely because they were prestigious projects that generated extensive records. The real story of 19th and early 20th century architecture is actually more impressive than any Tartarian fantasy. It was an era of explosive innovation. Steel frame construction enabled skyscrapers. Reinforced concrete allowed new structural possibilities. Elevators made tall buildings practical. Electric lighting, central heating, and indoor plumbing transformed how buildings functioned. Mass production made elaborate decoration affordable. This was also an era of ambitious vision. Cities competed to create landmarks. Wealthy industrialists funded museums, libraries, and universities with spectacular architecture. Governments built massive train stations and administrative buildings to project power and modernity. This wasn't a lost civilization's remnants being discovered. It was a civilization building its own monuments with pride and confidence in its capabilities.
The Tartaria conspiracy theory isn't just about architecture and maps. For many believers, these are pieces of evidence pointing to something far larger, a deliberate, systematic erasure of an advanced civilization from history. This aspect of the theory is sometimes called the Great Reset or the mudflood, and it involves claims of global catastrophe, technological suppression, and historical falsification on a massive scale. Let's explore this theory in detail, understand why people find it compelling, and then examine what evidence actually says. The core narrative goes something like this. In the 1800s, the world was very different from what we're taught. The Tartarian Empire, a peaceful and technologically advanced civilization, controlled much of Asia, Europe, and possibly other continents. This empire had achieved technological marvels that we're told weren't possible until much later,
free wireless energy, advanced transportation, sophisticated architecture, and possibly other technologies that have been completely suppressed. According to the theory, this civilization represented a threat to certain powerful groups who wanted to control the world through centralized power, fossil fuel dependency, and hierarchical systems. These groups, variously identified as banking families, secret societies, or simply the powers that be, orchestrated the destruction of Tartaria through a combination of methods. Some versions of the theory claim there was a worldwide catastrophe around the mid-1800s. This is the mudflood event. Supposedly, a massive deluge of mud swept across the planet, burying the lower levels of buildings, destroying infrastructure, killing millions of people, and devastating the Tartarian Empire. The cause of the flood varies by theory. Some claim it was a natural disaster, others suggest it was deliberately triggered using advanced technology, and some connect it to other alternative history ideas like pole shifts or cosmic events. Following this catastrophe, the theory continues, the surviving power structures embarked on a massive historical rewriting campaign. They created false chronologies, fabricated histories of different nations that supposedly built the Tartarian structures, and invented entire historical narratives to hide the truth. This is why Tartaria disappeared from maps and textbooks, not because it was a geographic term that evolved, but because it was deliberately erased. The theory suggests that institutions like schools, universities, museums, and governments all participated in this cover-up, either knowingly or because they were teaching falsified information they believed was true. Anyone who questioned the official history was marginalized or silenced. The true history was buried so thoroughly that most people today have no idea it ever existed. Some versions of the theory extend to claim that many famous historical figures were either fictional or had their real achievements attributed to them falsely. They suggest that buildings supposedly built by different cultures were actually all Tartarian, just relabeled. They claim that orphan trains in America, which really did transport orphaned or neglected children to new homes in the 1800s and early 1900s, were actually repopulating areas after the Tartarian population was wiped out. The timeline usually given for these events centers on the mid to late 1800s, with the catastrophe happening somewhere between 1810 and 1850, and the systematic historical rewriting occurring in the following decades. This period is chosen because it's before photography became widespread, but after printing had developed enough to spread information quickly. Why do people find this theory compelling? Several psychological and social factors are at play. First, there's a genuine sense that something is wrong with the official narratives we're taught. Many people feel disconnected from mainstream institutions. They notice inconsistencies in what they were taught in school, or they learn about historical events that weren't covered in their education. This creates a feeling that they've been lied to, which makes them receptive to alternative explanations. Second, the physical evidence seems compelling at first glance. Old photographs do show beautiful buildings that seem incredibly elaborate. Maps do show Tartaria across centuries. Buildings do have features below ground level. When someone first encounters these pieces of evidence without context, it can seem like proof of something hidden. Third, the theory offers a grand, unifying explanation. Instead of history being a complex mess of competing groups, changing technologies, evolving cultures, and contingent events, the Tartaria theory reduces everything to a simple story. There was an advanced good civilization, evil forces destroyed it, and now those forces control the world. This simplicity is emotionally satisfying, even if it's not accurate.
Fourth, researching this theory makes people feel like investigators, uncovering truth, finding old maps, examining photographs, connecting patterns. These activities are engaging. When someone invests time in this research, they become emotionally invested in the conclusions they reach. Changing their mind would mean admitting they wasted that time. Fifth, the theory connects to real anxieties about power,
control and historical truth. It's true that powerful interests do sometimes suppress information. It's true that victors write history and marginalized perspectives get excluded. The Tartaria theory takes these legitimate concerns and extends them into a totalizing conspiracy. Now let's examine the problems with this theory, starting with the supposed mudflood. The claim is that a worldwide deluge of mud buried buildings sometime in the 1800s. But if this happened, it would have left massive geological evidence. Geologists study sediment layers carefully. A sudden deposit of mud across the entire planet would be immediately obvious in the geological record. It would show up in core samples from ice, from ocean floors, from lake beds, from caves, everywhere. The mud would have a distinctive composition and a clear dating layer. This evidence doesn't exist. Geologists have extensively studied the past 200 years of geological history. They can identify volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, floods, and other events with precision. No worldwide mud deposit from the 1800s appears in any geological data. This alone should disprove the mudflood theory. What about all those buildings with windows below ground level? As we discussed in the architecture section, we have documented explanations for each one. Cities raised street levels. Buildings were built with deliberate basements. Excavations lowered the surrounding ground. These processes are recorded in city planning documents, newspapers, and photographs showing the work being done. The theory requires that this documentation is all fabricated, or that everyone involved in urban planning for the past century and a half has been part of a conspiracy. But consider how many people that would involve. Every city planner, civil engineer, construction worker, journalist, photographer, and property owner would need to either be in on the conspiracy or somehow completely fooled. The logistics of such a cover-up would be impossible. Now consider the historical rewriting aspect. The theory claims that history was systematically falsified in the mid to late 1800s to hide the Tartarian Empire. But this is when we actually have the most extensive historical documentation. The 1800s saw an explosion of newspapers, journals, books, photographs, and personal correspondence. Millions of people were literate and writing things down. If Tartaria had been a major empire that was suddenly destroyed and then erased from history, we would need to explain how every newspaper archive, every personal diary, every photograph, every government record, and every family's oral history was altered. We'd need to explain how people who lived through the supposed catastrophe somehow forgot it happened or were convinced to lie about it. Consider someone who would have been an adult in 1840. If the mud flood happened in that era, this person would remember the world before and after. They would talk to their children and grandchildren about it. Those stories would persist through multiple generations. Some of those people would have written about their experiences. Yet we have no such accounts. No letters, no diaries, no nothing describing anything like the catastrophic events the theory requires. The theory also can't account for continuous documentation. Take a city like London. We have maps, property records, census data, newspapers, photographs, and endless other documentation for London going back centuries. We can trace individual buildings through time, see when they were built, who owned them, what happened to them. We can read contemporary accounts of construction projects. We can see the gradual evolution of the city from medieval layout to Victorian expansion to modern metropolis. There's no missing period. There's no sudden discontinuity. The records are continuous. The same applies to families and institutions. Many European and Asian families have maintained records for centuries. Universities have kept archives since their founding. Churches have baptism, marriage, and death records going back hundreds of years. These records are continuous. They don't show a break where Tartaria existed and then suddenly disappeared. What about the claim that Tartarian Empire had advanced technology that was suppressed? This requires explaining why such technology left no trace. Where are the power plants? Where are the transmission systems? Where are the patents, the technical manuals, the specialized tools required to build and maintain this technology?
Technology doesn't just disappear. When civilizations fall, their technology persists in various forms. We find Roman concrete in ancient ruins. We find Viking ships preserved in bogs. We find ancient tools, weapons, and industrial sites from countless past civilizations. If Tartaria had wireless energy transmission or other advanced tech, we'd find the infrastructure, the components, the evidence of its existence. Moreover, technology develops gradually. Modern electricity didn't appear overnight. It evolved through decades of experimentation, building on earlier discoveries. If Tartaria had advanced electrical technology, there would be a developmental history showing how they achieved it. There would be earlier, more primitive versions. There would be failed experiments. There would be a trail of innovation. The theory also struggles to explain why the supposed conspirators would go to such extreme lengths. If powerful groups destroyed Tartaria and its technology, why preserve the buildings at all? Why not demolish everything? Leaving these structures standing while claiming they were built by other civilizations seems like an unnecessarily complicated approach. It would be easier to destroy all evidence completely. Furthermore, if the goal was to suppress free energy technology, we need to ask why anyone would care. The theory assumes that controlling energy creates power, which is true to some extent. But powerful groups throughout history have adapted to changing technologies. When oil replaced coal, the powerful adapted. When nuclear energy was developed, the powerful adapted. If free wireless energy existed, powerful groups would find ways to control access to it, tax it, or monetize it somehow. Total suppression would be harder and less profitable than control. The orphan trains element of the theory deserves particular attention because it involves real historical events being reinterpreted. Between 1854 and 1929, charitable organizations in the United States did send approximately 200,000 children from crowded eastern cities to new homes in the Midwest and West. This program was called the Orphan Train Movement. The theory suggests these children weren't actually orphans or neglected city children. Instead, they were survivors of the Tartarian population being redistributed to repopulate areas after the mudflood killed most people. This interpretation ignores the extensive documentation of the orphan train movement. We have records from the Children's Aid Society and other organizations that ran these programs. We have testimonies from the children themselves recorded later in life. We have newspaper accounts from the time. We know why the program existed. Urbanization had created poverty and overcrowding, and reformers believed rural life would be better for children. Some of these children were indeed orphans. Many others had living parents who couldn't care for them due to poverty, illness, or other circumstances. The program had serious problems, including insufficient screening of adoptive families, minimal follow-up, and sometimes exploitation of the children as labor. But these problems are documented and acknowledged by historians. The program's existence doesn't require a secret repopulation effort. Another claim involves the Tartari theory interpreting old photographs as evidence. Proponents share images of cities being built or excavated, claiming they showed discovery of Tartarian ruins rather than normal construction. But when you research the specific photographs, you find they're from documented construction projects, archaeological digs, or infrastructure work, all with clear explanations and contemporary records. For example, some photographs show massive excavations in cities like New York or Chicago. The theory claims these show uncovering of Tartarian structures. In reality, these are usually from subway construction, sewer installation, or foundation work for skyscrapers. The projects were covered extensively in newspapers. Engineering journals published technical details. Workers were interviewed. City records show permits, contracts, and inspections. There's no mystery. The theory also sometimes claims that world's fairs were held to show off surviving Tartarian buildings before destroying them to hide evidence. But this interpretation is backwards. The fairs specifically commissioned new temporary buildings to be built, hired architects to design them, and documented the entire process. After the fairs, most buildings were demolished as planned because they were never meant to be permanent. Some structures were kept and still exist today, like the Palace of Fine Arts in San Francisco, or the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, which was the Palace of Fine Arts from the 1893 Chicago World Fair. These surviving buildings prove they were constructed when history says they were. You can examine them. You can see how they're built. You can compare them to the construction photographs and plans. Everything matches. If they were ancient Tartarian buildings, their construction would be completely different from what the architectural plans show. The theory requires believing that thousands of architects, engineers, construction workers, journalists, photographers, city officials, and ordinary citizens all either participated in an elaborate hoax or were somehow fooled. It requires believing that this conspiracy maintained perfect secrecy across multiple generations while involving millions of people. This level of conspiracy is simply not plausible. Consider also the international dimension. The Tartaria theory spans multiple continents and many different countries, often with competing interests. Are we to believe that rival nations during colonial eras, during world wars, during the Cold War, all cooperated perfectly to maintain this historical fabrication? That no defector ever revealed the truth? That no nation ever tried to use knowledge of Tartaria as propaganda against enemies? The Soviet Union extensively rewrote some history for propaganda purposes. If Tartaria had been real, and if Western powers were hiding it, Soviet historians with full access to Russian archives, including records from the Central Asian regions Europeans called Tartary, confirmed the same basic historical narrative that Western historians describe. The theory also can't explain physical evidence that contradicts it. We have ancient texts mentioning various groups in Central Asia using different names, not Tartaria. We have coins, pottery, weapons, and other artifacts from specific cultures and time periods that match historical records. We have genetic evidence showing population movements and relationships consistent with documented history. We have linguistic evidence showing how languages evolved and spread in ways that match historical records. Carbon dating, dendrochronology, and other scientific dating methods allow us to determine when things were made with considerable accuracy. These methods have been tested extensively and shown to be reliable. Buildings, artifacts, and documents all date to the periods history says they're from, not to a unified Tartarian civilization. The Great Reset theory ultimately requires us to reject not just history, but geology, archaeology, engineering, architecture, genetics, linguistics, and numerous other scientific fields. It requires believing that millions of experts across generations and continents have all been wrong or lying. It requires believing that physical evidence, documentary records, and scientific analysis all somehow conspired to hide the truth. In contrast, conventional history requires only that people in the past did what evidence shows they did, built impressive buildings using known techniques, organized politically into various empires and nations, developed technology gradually through innovation, and recorded their activities in ways that have been preserved for us to study. Which explanation is more plausible? The one requiring a global conspiracy involving millions of people, maintaining perfect secrecy for over a century? Or the one where people did what they said they were doing, left records of it, and those records have been preserved and studied?
The appeal of the Great Reset theory, like many conspiracy theories, lies not in its evidence, but in its narrative. It offers villains to blame for the world's problems. It makes believers feel like they possess secret knowledge. It provides simple explanations for complex historical processes. But wanting something to be true doesn't make it true, and feeling like history has been falsified doesn't mean it actually has been. Now that we've explored the Tartaria conspiracy theory, let's examine what history actually tells us about this vast region. The story is more complex and fascinating than a single unified empire, and it's thoroughly documented through multiple lines of evidence that all corroborate each other. We need to start with the Mongol Empire because it's central to understanding how Europeans came to use the term Tartary for this region. In 1206, a tribal leader named Temujin united the Mongol tribes and took the title Genghis Khan, meaning universal ruler. Over the next 2 decades, he built the largest contiguous land empire in history through brilliant military strategy, political cunning, and absolutely ruthless conquest. The Mongol military machine was devastatingly effective. Their cavalry forces could cover vast distances quickly. They used psychological warfare, spreading terror about their brutality to encourage cities to surrender without fighting. They employed sophisticated siege weapons and engineers from conquered peoples. They gathered intelligence systematically and adapted tactics to different enemies. They were organized into units with clear command structures and innovative signaling systems.
By 1227, when Genghis Khan died, his empire stretched from Korea to Poland, from Siberia to Iraq. His successors continued expanding it. His grandson Kublai Khan conquered China and established the Yuan dynasty. Another grandson, Hulagu, conquered Persia and destroyed the Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad. The Golden Horde controlled Russia and the Eurasian steppes. The Chagatai Khanate ruled Central Asia. This massive empire left extensive evidence. We have the Mongol law code called the Yasa. We have the secret history of the Mongols, written shortly after Genghis Khan's death. We have Persian chronicles by historians like Rashid al-Din, who served the Mongol Khanate. We have Chinese records of the Yuan dynasty. We have Russian chronicles describing the Mongol invasion and subsequent rule. We have archaeological evidence of Mongol camps, cities, and battlefields. This is one of the most thoroughly documented empires in medieval history. The Mongol conquests had profound effects that shaped the regions Europeans would call Tartary. First, they created extensive trade routes. The famous Silk Road reached its peak under Mongol rule because a single power controlled the entire route from China to Eastern Europe. Merchants could travel safely under Mongol protection. Ideas, technologies, religions, and goods flowed across Eurasia more freely than ever before. Second, the Mongols facilitated cultural exchange. They were pragmatic rulers who employed talented people regardless of ethnicity or religion. Chinese engineers worked on Persian projects. Persian administrators governed in China. European craftsmen worked in Mongol courts. This exchange happened under what historians call the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol Peace, when Mongol power kept the vast empire relatively stable. Third, the Mongols changed the ethnic and linguistic landscape. As Mongol warriors settled in conquered territories, they intermarried with local populations. Over generations, many Mongols adopted local cultures and religions. In the Golden Horde, which ruled Russia and the western steppes, Mongols mixed with Turkic peoples called Kipchaks. The rulers converted to Islam. The language shifted from Mongolian to Turkic dialects. By the 1300s, these people were being called Tatars, even though their ancestry was mixed. This brings us to an important point about the Tatar identity. As we discussed earlier, Tatars were originally a specific tribal group that Genghis Khan fought against. But after the Mongol conquests, Tatar became a much broader ethnic and linguistic category. It came to refer to various Turkic-speaking peoples across the former Mongol Empire, from the Volga River to Central Asia to Siberia.
When the Mongol Empire fragmented after Kublai Khan died in 1294, the successor states went their separate ways. The Golden Horde controlled the steppes north of the Black and Caspian Seas. Its Khan was theoretically subordinate to the Great Khan in China, but in practice he ruled independently. The Golden Horde extracted tribute from Russian principalities, which had to send their princes to the Horde's capital to receive approval to rule. This system, called the Tatar yoke by Russians, lasted about 250 years. During this time, Russian culture was significantly influenced by Mongol administration, military organization, taxation systems, and even vocabulary. Russian borrowed Mongol words for administrative terms, monetary concepts, and various other things. The experience of Mongol rule shaped how Russia would later build its own empire. The Golden Horde began fragmenting in the late 1300s and 1400s. A ruler named Timur, also called Tamerlane, rose to power in Central Asia and attacked the Golden Horde, weakening it significantly. Regional leaders broke away and established independent khanates. The Crimean Khanate was founded in 1441. The Kazan Khanate formed in the mid-1400s. The Astrakhan Khanate, the Siberian Khanate, and others appeared as the Golden Horde's power crumbled. These were real countries with real governments. Take the Kazan Khanate as an example. Its capital was the city of Kazan on the Volga River. The Khan ruled with assistance from a council of nobles called the Karachi Beylar. The Khanate controlled important trade routes and collected revenue from commerce, agriculture, and tribute from subject peoples. It had its own army, its own coinage, and diplomatic relations with neighboring states.
We know all this because extensive records survive. Russian chronicles describe interactions with Kazan. The Khanate's coins still exist in museums and private collections. Archaeological excavations in Kazan have uncovered buildings, artifacts, and inscriptions from the Khanate period. After Russia conquered Kazan in 1552, many records were preserved in Russian archives. There's no mystery about whether the state existed or what it was like. The Crimean Khanate is even better documented because it lasted longer, until 1783. It maintained close relations with the Ottoman Empire, which kept extensive records. European powers traded with Crimea and sent ambassadors there. Travelers wrote accounts of visiting the Khanate. The Crimean Tatars had their own chronicles and literature. The architectural heritage of Crimea includes buildings from the Khanate period, including the Khan's Palace in Bakhchisarai, which still stands today and can be visited. Now let's talk about Central Asia, which Europeans often labeled Independent Tartary or Great Tartary on their maps. This region included the ancient cities of the Silk Road, Samarkand, Bukhara, Khiva, and others. Far from being unknown or mysterious, these cities were famous centers of Islamic learning, craftsmanship, and trade for over 1,000 years. After the breakup of the Mongol Empire, Central Asia was controlled by various regional powers. Timur established a powerful empire centered in Samarkand in the late 1300s. His empire, called the Timurid Empire, was known for spectacular architecture and patronage of arts and sciences. After the Timurid Empire collapsed, Uzbek Khans established Khanates in Bukhara, Khiva, and Kokand. Kazakhs, Kyrgyz, Turkmen, and other peoples formed their own political structures adapted to their nomadic or semi-nomadic lifestyles. Again, we have extensive documentation. Persian and Chagatai Turkic chronicles describe the history of these regions. We have accounts from European travelers who visited Central Asia, including Venetian traders, Russian explorers, and British agents during the Great Game. We have architectural monuments that can be studied and dated. We have coins, manuscripts, and countless other artifacts. The architecture alone tells a story. The Registan Square in Samarkand, with its 3 magnificent madrasas, decorated in blue tile work, was built in the 1600s and 1700s. We know who commissioned these buildings, who designed them, when they were built, and how they were used. The minarets, mosques, and mausoleums scattered across Central Asia each have documented histories. They weren't built by a mysterious Tartarian empire. They were built by specific rulers whose names we know.
using techniques and styles that evolved from earlier Islamic architecture. What about Siberia, the vast northern region that European maps often labeled Russian Tartary or Muscovite Tartary? Russian expansion into Siberia began seriously in the late 1500s and accelerated in the 1600s. Russian merchants and Cossacks pushed eastward, seeking furs, which were incredibly valuable in European and Asian markets. They established fortified trading posts, subdued or made alliances with indigenous peoples, and gradually extended Russian control all the way to the Pacific Ocean. This expansion is meticulously documented. Russian chronicles describe the campaigns. We have reports from explorers like Semyon Dezhnev, who sailed around the eastern tip of Siberia in 1648, proving that Asia and America were separate continents. We have records from the administrative centers established to govern Siberian territories. We have maps showing the gradual progression of Russian control. The indigenous peoples of Siberia, Yakuts, Evenks, Nenets, Chukchi, and many others, had their own histories and cultures that Russians encountered and documented. Some of these peoples were nomadic herders, others were settled farmers or fishermen. They spoke dozens of different languages from various language families. They had complex spiritual beliefs, sophisticated survival technologies adapted to harsh environments, and distinctive art forms. When Russians established control, they demanded yasak, a tribute paid in furs. They built ostrog, wooden fortified posts. They encouraged Russian settlers to move eastward. This colonial process was often brutal, involving violence, disease, and cultural destruction. But it was a historical process we can trace through documents, archaeological sites, and the testimonies of surviving indigenous communities. It wasn't the discovery of ruins from a vanished Tartarian empire.
Let's also address Mongolia specifically, since it's central to the original Mongol Empire story. After the Yuan dynasty fell in China in 1368, Mongolia itself became politically divided. Various Mongol groups competed for power. The Ming dynasty in China tried to control or influence Mongolia. In the 1600s, the Manchu people from Manchuria conquered China and established the Qing dynasty. They also brought Mongolia under their control. The Qing dynasty governed Mongolia as a distinct territory separate from China proper. They maintained the traditional Mongol system of hereditary nobility and religious authority under the Dalai Lama and other Buddhist leaders. But they also installed Qing administrators and military garrisons to ensure control. This system lasted until the fall of the Qing dynasty in 1912. Mongolia declared independence in 1911, though this independence was complicated by competing Chinese and Russian interests. After the Russian Revolution, Mongolia became a Soviet satellite state in 1924, establishing the Mongolian People's Republic, the second communist country in the world. This lasted until 1992, when Mongolia transitioned to democracy. The point is, Mongolia's entire history, from ancient times to the present, is documented. We can trace political changes, cultural developments, relations with neighboring powers, and social transformations. At no point does a unified Tartarian Empire appear. Instead, we see a complex history of various Mongol groups, khanates, empires, and eventually modern nation-states. Now, why did Europeans use the term Tartary if the regions actually contained all these different peoples and states? This comes down to a combination of linguistic convention, geographic ignorance, and practical map-making needs. In medieval and early modern Europe, geographers inherited terminology from classical Greek and Roman sources. Ancient authors had vague knowledge of peoples beyond Persia and Scythia. They used various names, Scythians, Samothans, Huns, to describe nomadic peoples from the steppes, often without clear understanding of ethnic distinctions. When the Mongols invaded in the 1200s, Europeans needed a name for these invaders. As we discussed, Tartar or Tartar became common. Europeans then applied this term backward and forward in time, using it as a general label for peoples from the Central Asian steppes, regardless of whether they were actually connected to the groups Genghis Khan's armies destroyed. As European knowledge of Asia improved, through exploration, trade, and diplomatic contact, map makers faced a challenge. They had more accurate information about some regions than others. The parts of Asia closest to European Russia, or accessible through Ottoman territories or reached by sea around India, were increasingly well known. But the interior regions, Mongolia, Western China, Central Asia, remained poorly understood. Cartographers used Tartary, with various modifiers, to indicate these less well-known regions. Chinese Tartary meant northern regions associated with China. Independent Tartary meant Central Asian areas not firmly controlled by any major empires Europeans recognized. Russian Tartary meant Siberian territories under Russian administration. These weren't countries called by these names, they were geographic shorthand for map-making purposes. As Russian, Chinese, British, and other powers extended control and gathered better information, the need for this vague terminology disappeared. More specific labels replaced it. This happened gradually throughout the 1800s. By the early 1900s, modern geographic terminology had completely replaced the older system. So, what history actually shows is not a mysterious disappearing empire, but a thoroughly documented progression. Real empires rose and fell. The Mongol Empire, various khanates, the expansion of Russia and China into frontier regions. Real peoples with distinct cultures, languages, and histories lived across this vast territory. The terminology used to describe them evolved as European knowledge improved. Every step of this process is documented through multiple independent lines of evidence. The real history is complex, involving numerous different groups, competing interests, gradual changes, and the messy reality of how empires expand, cultures interact, and knowledge develops. It's not as simple as there was an advanced Tartarian Empire that was erased, but it's far more interesting and ultimately more meaningful because it actually happened.
Understanding why the Tartaria conspiracy theory emerged requires us to examine several overlapping factors: how geographic terminology evolved, gaps in public historical knowledge, the nature of internet communities, and psychological reasons why alternative histories appeal to people. This isn't about dismissing believers as foolish, but about understanding legitimate reasons why this theory seems plausible to many intelligent people. Let's start with the terminology problem, which is at the heart of the whole mystery. The word Tartary had multiple meanings that shifted over centuries, and these meanings were never precisely defined. This ambiguity creates fertile ground for misunderstanding. In the earliest usage, Tartar referred to the Mongol invaders who swept across Asia and Europe in the 1200s. Europeans at the time didn't distinguish carefully between Mongols, Tatars, and other steppe peoples. They were all frightening nomadic warriors from the east, so they all got lumped under one term. This was similar to how Europeans later called all indigenous Americans Indians, despite them being hundreds of distinct peoples with different languages and cultures. As European geographic knowledge slowly expanded, Tartary evolved into a geographic term. It didn't refer to a specific political entity, but rather to the vast, poorly understood interior regions of Asia. Different map makers used it slightly differently. Some meant everything from the Caspian Sea to the Pacific. Others used it more narrowly for Central Asia. Still others created subdivisions like Little Tartary, Great Tartary, and Chinese Tartary. Here's the crucial point. This terminology was never standardized because it was never meant to describe a unified nation. It was a placeholder term for regions where European knowledge was incomplete.
As that knowledge improved, more accurate terminology replaced it. But because this process happened gradually over centuries, there's no single moment when Tartary officially stopped existing. It just faded away as better information rendered it obsolete. This creates a problem for modern people researching online. When you find old maps showing Tartary prominently labeled, and then find modern maps where that name has completely disappeared, it looks suspicious if you don't understand the context. It looks like something was erased rather than like terminology evolved. The situation is made more confusing by the fact that most people never learned about this terminology shift in school. History education typically focuses on major empires, wars, and political movements. The evolution of geographic terminology isn't usually covered, even though it's important for understanding how knowledge developed. So when someone discovers these old maps with Tartary on them, it genuinely seems like hidden history. This leads to the second major factor: gaps in public historical knowledge. Most people's understanding of history comes from what they learned in school, usually before age 18. History curriculums, especially in American schools, tend to focus heavily on national history with limited coverage of other regions. A typical American student might learn about ancient Greece and Rome, medieval Europe, the American Revolution, the Civil War, and the World Wars, with relatively little about Central Asia, the Mongol Empire, or Russian expansion. This means that when someone encounters references to Tartary, they're unlikely to have context for understanding it. They don't know about the Mongol Empire's successor states. They don't know how European cartographic knowledge evolved. They don't know about Russian colonization of Siberia or the various Central Asian khanates. Without this context, the conspiracy theory narrative fills the gap. The theory actually provides a story that seems to explain the evidence. It tells you who Tartarians were, what happened to them, and why you've never heard of them. For someone without the historical background to evaluate these claims, this explanation can be convincing, especially because it comes with visual evidence in the form of maps and photographs of impressive architecture. Internet research dynamics amplify these problems. When someone searches online for information about Tartary, they'll find a mix of legitimate historical sources and conspiracy theory content. But the conspiracy content is often more engaging, more confidently stated, and more readily accessible than academic historical analysis. Academic historians write for other academics, using specialized terminology and assuming background knowledge. Conspiracy theorists write for general audiences, making their content more understandable to non-specialists.
So where does this leave us? We've explored the Tartaria mystery from every angle: the historical maps, the actual peoples and empires of Central Asia, the architectural evidence, the conspiracy theories, and the reasons why confusion exists. Now we need to put it all together and understand what this phenomenon tells us about history, knowledge, and belief in the modern world. Let's start by summarizing what we can actually verify about Tartary. First, the word itself was real and widely used. European cartographers from the 1500s through the 1800s consistently labeled large portions of northern and central Asia as Tartary, or variations thereof. This isn't disputed. The maps exist. You can see them in libraries and archives around the world. Second, the word referred to different things at different times and to different people. Initially, it meant the Mongol invaders and their empire. Later, it became a geographic term for poorly understood regions of Asia. Eventually, it was subdivided into multiple categories, trying to capture political divisions as European knowledge improved. There was never a single unified Tartarian Empire with that name, but there were real empires, khanates, and peoples living in regions
Europeans labeled with this term. Third, the terminology disappeared because it became obsolete. As Russian, Chinese, and European imperial powers extended control over these regions, as explorers mapped them in detail, as scholars learned local languages and histories, more accurate terminology replaced the vague catch-all term. This process was gradual, spanning decades, and was driven by improving knowledge rather than by conspiracy. Fourth, the peoples called Tartars by Europeans were and are real. Modern Tartar communities exist in Russia, Central Asia, and elsewhere. They have documented histories, connecting them to the medieval khanates and earlier tribal confederations. Their languages, cultures, and genetic heritage can be traced through time. They didn't disappear, they're still here. Fifth, the architecture attributed to Tartaria by conspiracy theories actually has well-documented histories. World's Fair buildings, government structures, train stations, and other impressive buildings from the 1800s and early 1900s have construction records, architectural plans, contemporary photographs, and other documentation showing when and how they were built. Claims they're ancient structures discovered and repurposed don't match the evidence. Sixth, there was no worldwide mud flood in the 1800s. No geological evidence supports this. The buried windows and below-ground features of old buildings have documented explanations involving urban development, deliberate basement construction, and street-level changes, all of which is recorded in city planning documents and contemporary sources. So, if the factual claims of the Tartaria conspiracy theory don't hold up, why does it persist and even grow? This is where the mystery becomes more interesting as a social phenomenon than as a historical fact. The Tartaria theory represents something larger than just confusion about Central Asian history. It's an example of how people construct alternative frameworks of understanding when they feel mainstream narratives are inadequate or untrustworthy. This isn't unique to Tartaria. Similar patterns appear with flat Earth theories, ancient alien theories, and countless other alternative history narratives.
What makes Tartaria particularly interesting is that it touches on real historical processes that are actually worth understanding better. European colonialism did suppress indigenous histories and cultures. Imperial powers did rewrite narratives to favor themselves. Knowledge has been lost when libraries were destroyed, oral traditions disrupted, or entire peoples decimated. These are real historical patterns that deserve serious attention. The problem with the Tartaria theory isn't that it asks whether powerful forces have shaped historical narratives. They absolutely have. The problem is that it attributes this to a specific, unfounded conspiracy about a civilization that didn't exist in the way described, rather than engaging with the complicated reality of how historical knowledge is constructed, contested, and sometimes genuinely lost or suppressed. Consider what scholars studying actual historical erasure have documented. We know about the systematic destruction of Nahuatl codices by Spanish conquistadors in Mexico. We know about the burning of the Library of Alexandria. We know about Stalin's attempts to erase certain people from photographs and records. We know about the Cultural Revolution's destruction of historical artifacts in China. We know about colonial education systems designed to suppress indigenous languages and histories. These real examples of historical suppression have certain characteristics. They involve identifiable actors with clear motives. They leave evidence of the suppression itself: the destroyed books, the edited photographs, the testimonies of survivors. They're usually incomplete, with some evidence surviving despite suppression attempts. And scholars can study them, document them, and work to recover what was lost.
The supposed suppression of Tartaria has none of these characteristics. We can't identify who supposedly suppressed it or why. We can't find evidence of suppression because the comprehensive documentation supposedly suppressed would have involved millions of people across many countries. The theory requires believing that all evidence was destroyed while somehow buildings attributed to Tartaria survived. It doesn't make logical sense. But here's what the Tartaria phenomenon does reveal. There's widespread hunger for historical knowledge that goes beyond what standard education provides. People want to understand how the world came to be the way it is. They want to know about places and peoples whose stories aren't featured prominently in mainstream narratives. This hunger is legitimate and valuable. The tragic thing about the Tartaria theory is that it directs this curiosity toward fiction rather than toward the genuinely fascinating real history of Central Asia. The actual story of the Mongol Empire, the Silk Road, the rise and fall of various khanates, Russian and Chinese imperial expansion, the diverse cultures of Turkic and Mongolic peoples, the complex interactions between nomadic and settled societies. All of this is incredibly interesting and worthy of study. If someone interested in Tartaria redirected their curiosity toward legitimate Central Asian history, they'd discover stories just as dramatic as any conspiracy theory. They'd learn about Genghis Khan's rise from a young man whose father was poisoned to builder of the largest land empire in history. They'd learn about the cultural flowering of Samarkand under Timur's rule. They'd learn about the Kazakh people's sophisticated understanding of ecology, allowing them to thrive in harsh environments. They'd learn about the brutal reality of Russian colonization and the resistance it faced. They'd learn about the survival and revival of Tatar culture despite historical suppression.
This real history is well documented, which means you can actually learn it rather than just speculating. There are primary sources you can read in translation. There are archaeological sites you can visit. There are historians who've devoted careers to studying these topics and are often happy to share their knowledge. There are museums with artifacts you can see. There are descendant communities whose living traditions connect to this history. The challenge is making this real history as accessible and engaging as conspiracy theories. Academic historians need to do better at communicating with general audiences. Educational systems need to provide better coverage of non-Western history. Media needs to create more documentaries, podcasts, and other content about these topics. And platforms need to adjust algorithms that currently push people toward fringe content rather than toward reliable information. For individuals currently convinced by the Tartaria theory, what would it take to change their minds? This is a difficult question because belief in conspiracy theories isn't primarily about evidence. It's about identity, community, and worldview. Simply presenting contradictory facts rarely works because people have psychological defenses that protect their existing beliefs. More effective might be showing how the real history answers the same questions and satisfies the same curiosities that drew them to the conspiracy theory. If someone is fascinated by ornate architecture, show them the real history of Beaux-Arts architecture and explain how modern people can learn these techniques. If someone wants to understand how power shapes historical narratives, point them toward post-colonial historians who study exactly that question rigorously. If someone enjoys investigating mysteries, introduce them to actual historical mysteries that remain unsolved and where amateur research could contribute. It's also important to validate the legitimate aspects of what draws people to the theory. The feeling that something is wrong with how history is taught? Valid. History education does have serious problems. The sense that powerful interests shape narratives? True, they do, though not in the way the conspiracy theory suggests. The desire to question authority? Healthy,
we should question claims and demand evidence. The problem is when these legitimate impulses lead to rejecting well-established knowledge in favor of unfounded speculation. We should also acknowledge our own uncertainty about historical knowledge. Historians don't claim to know everything. There are periods and places where evidence is sparse and conclusions must be tentative. There are ongoing debates about how to interpret evidence. There are discoveries that change our understanding. Being honest about these uncertainties doesn't mean anything goes. It means distinguishing between what we're confident about, what we're uncertain about, and what we simply don't know. For the regions Europeans called Tartary, we actually know quite a lot. The basic political history is well established. The archaeological record is extensive. The documentary evidence is abundant, even if much of it requires specialized language skills to access. The genetic and linguistic evidence corroborates the historical narrative. This doesn't mean every detail is certain, but the big picture is clear and well supported. What about the people who make videos and write articles promoting the Tartaria theory? Their motivations vary. Some genuinely believe what they're saying and see themselves as truth seekers fighting against historical suppression. Others may be more cynical, recognizing that conspiracy content generates views, subscribers, and revenue. Many probably fall somewhere in between. They half believe their own narrative while also enjoying the attention and income it generates. It's worth noting that promoting conspiracy theories can be profitable. YouTube channels focused on Tartaria can earn money from ads, sponsorships, and viewer donations. Books about alternative history sell well. Speaking at conferences or selling courses can generate income. This doesn't necessarily mean it's all a deliberate scam, but it does mean there are financial incentives that reward continued promotion of the theory, regardless of evidence. For people encountering this topic for the first time, what should they do? How can they evaluate the claims and decide what to believe? Here are some practical suggestions. First, seek out multiple sources with different perspectives. Don't just watch videos from Tartaria believers. Read what mainstream historians say about Central Asian history. Compare the different narratives and see which one is better supported by evidence. Second, learn how to evaluate sources. Consider who created a source, what their expertise is, whether they cite their own sources, and whether their claims can be verified independently. YouTube videos made by someone with no historical training should be weighed differently than peer-reviewed articles by scholars who study these regions. Third, look for primary sources when possible. If someone claims a building was discovered rather than constructed, search for contemporary newspapers from when it was supposedly built. If someone claims Tartaria disappeared from maps mysteriously, look at actual historical maps from different decades and read what the cartographers wrote about their methods. Fourth, be skeptical of unfalsifiable claims. If every piece of contradictory evidence can be explained away as part of the conspiracy, that's a warning sign. Good theories can potentially be proven wrong if contrary evidence is found. Conspiracy theories often insulate themselves from disproof. Fifth, consider alternative explanations. When you see something that seems mysterious, ask yourself what other explanations might exist besides the conspiratorial one. Often there are simpler, more plausible explanations that don't require vast conspiracies. Sixth, be aware of your own biases and motivations. Are you drawn to this theory because the evidence genuinely compels you, or because you want it to be true? Because it makes you feel special? Because it confirms suspicions you already had? Being honest about your motivations helps you evaluate evidence more fairly. Finally, remember that not knowing something doesn't mean the answer must be a conspiracy. There are legitimate mysteries and uncertainties in history. Sometimes the honest answer is, we don't know for sure. That's okay. Mystery is part of what makes history interesting. So what's the final verdict on the mysterious kingdom of Tartary? It was real as a geographic term and as a collection of real peoples and real states, but it was never the unified, advanced empire that conspiracy theorists describe. The real history is more complex, more diverse, and ultimately more interesting than the simplified narrative of either glorious Tartaria or deliberately erased civilization. The maps were real, made by real cartographers trying to represent regions they had limited information about. The peoples were real, with rich histories and cultures that deserved to be studied and understood accurately. The architecture was real, built by known people using documented techniques. The terminology evolved naturally as knowledge improved, not because of historical suppression. The mystery of Tartaria isn't really about Tartaria at all. It's about how we understand history, how we evaluate evidence, how we form beliefs, and how we decide who to trust. It's about the gaps between expert knowledge and public understanding. It's about how curiosity can lead either towards better understanding or toward elaborate fiction. It's about the very human desire to find hidden meaning and order in a complicated world. Understanding this phenomenon requires empathy for why people are drawn to these theories, combined with clear explanation of what evidence actually shows. It requires better education, more accessible scholarship, and recognition that alternative histories emerge partly because mainstream histories haven't adequately addressed legitimate questions and concerns. The story of Tartaria, both the real historical regions and the modern conspiracy theory, ultimately teaches us about ourselves, how we learn, what we believe, and why we make those choices.